Henshin to go, baby. What's good, guys? Yoku here, and Cold Dragon Young is finally a man. A man that's a dragon, but that's not important. What's important is you're here to learn how to make the most out of your newly pulled Imagine Dragon. Excellent. With the use of my guide, of course, and I'm here to give it to you. Now, let's not waste any more time. Imbibitor Lunae is here. Lunae, Daniel.
I stand here to fight for a new life.
Cold Dragon Daniel is actually pretty straightforward. You use his skill to enhance your basic attack, you suck up 3 skill points, and then you obliterate whatever enemy is in front of you by dishing out like 200,000 damage at once. Now, I know that sounds really good, but there's a little more to it than that, because as we all know, sucking up 3 skill points every single time your DPS attacks isn't the most common thing in Star Rail. Speaking of skill points, let's talk about his skill. Dracore Libre. Dracore Libre. One of these days, I'm gonna learn how to speak like a Latin, and it's gonna be fire. Similar to Xing Shui, his skill is unique in that it doesn't end the turn and instead is used as a buffer or enhancement tool. Once, twice, or thrice. You will be using this all the time, so get used to spamming E until you see this message. It is important to note that you want to aim for using Divine Spear or the Fulgurant Leap as much as you can to get the max stacks out of Dominating Roar, Divine Spear being the 2 skill enhancement and Fulgurant Leap being the 3 skill burst, max skill burst, or max skill enhancement, all of which I will be referring to in this video. Now, about Dominating Roar, every hit after the 4th one will increase Dan Heng's crit damage by a certain percentage up to 4 stacks, and then it immediately disappears at the end of his turn unless you spend money. At the same time, he has a talent, Righteous Heart, which will also trigger after each hit, except this one stacks up to 6 times. Now, instead of a crit damage increase, you'll be getting a raw damage increase. Now, initially, I assumed Daniel would suffer a fate of not being able to consistently use his max burst skill due to the fact that you're sucking up 3 skill points each and every time. And technically, this is still true to some degree, but there's a way to get 3 skill bursts twice every single cycle. I'm gonna explain that in detail later on in the video, but as for right now, let's continue the assumption that you normally won't get 3 skill bursts more than once per cycle. This is where his ultimate Azur's Aqua Ablutes All. Why is it Azur's Aqua Ablutes All? Do you guys hear how that's, you know what, whatever, Hoyo, don't snipe me. Azur's Aqua comes into play by every time he uses ult, he's going to gain 2 Squama Sacrosancta, which are the yellow golden tokens, and he can hold up to 3. These yellow tokens are basically free skill points for Dan Heng. Holding 2 SP means you only need to consume 1 real SP for that action, which in practice would allow you to get 3 skill bursts each time you use your ultimate. Obviously, this will always come down to how you play, but at the very basis of what I'm explaining, this is how it works. It makes it even better that his first trace, Starveil, immediately generates 15 energy at the start of every battle. And now that I've said that out loud, I think this is actually a great way for me to start talking about his traces. Okay, so within Daniel's traces, you're going to be getting 12% free crit rate, which is going to be very important for basically not needing crit substats. You're also going to be getting about 22% free imaginary damage, so long as you get these nodes here. As far as his bonus ability, Starveil, we've talked about that, being able to regenerate the 15 energy. Aqua Rain is going to give you 35% resistance to crowd control, similar to Loach's. Lastly, is going to be Jolt Anew, which is going to give you a 24% crit damage increase when dealing damage to enemy targets with imaginary weakness. If I had to give any particular order, it would be Jolt Anew, and then it would be Aqua Rain, and then it would be Starveil. Now, if you have a team that's built out to where you don't have to worry about getting hit, then you can obviously switch Starveil to Aqua Rain. But the order in which I would enhance his actual abilities would be the basic attack, because that's the one you're using the most, then his skill, because this actually has some huge multipliers attached to it with the Dominating Roar. Next would be my talent, because I also want more multipliers from Righteous Heart, and you're always going to be getting these so long as you attack. And then finally would be the ultimate, because it has the weakest multipliers out of everything, and I really only care about the free 2 tokens.
I stand here to fight for a new life.
Just a moment ago in the video, I mentioned being able to get Dan Heng to use a max skill burst twice per cycle. There's an ironic part to this and an unfortunate part to this. The ironic part is that all of you were saying Bronya would be one of his worst partners due to her consuming skill points every turn. And as it turns out, Queen Bronya is the only one who's going to be able to actively give him max skill burst twice in every single turn. The unfortunate part to what I just said is that it requires Bronya. For that reason, I will be breaking down how to play Imagine Dragon into two small sections, with Bronya and without. Now with Bronya, you get a lot of juicy tidbits. You'll want to speed tune her 1 point behind him or whatever it is that you're getting. There are certain speed values or speed thresholds you're going to want to abide by. In this case, you put 135 speed on Daniel, then you put 134 on Bronya. I normally use Messenger or the Wind Relic set, which could mess up the order of these two, so I'd advise against it, or you'll be doing way more speed tuning than I want to. And yes, I said I, not you, because I don't want to do it. At the start of the battle, Dan Heng does a single basic attack, not enhanced, keep that in mind. This is going to give Bronya the 1 SP to use and will start the self-cycle strategy for Imagine Dragon. Bronya immediately goes after him, and then she uses her redeployment skill. Daniel advances forward and spams E for max skill bursts, and at this point you now have ultimate, which means you have 2 free tokens available after you use it. As you can notice on my screen, both Bronya and Daniel are at the bottom of the cycle now. From here you literally rinse, cycle, and repeat. Now if you have Bronya's signature light cone, you can also take into account giving yourself a free skill point once you use her ultimate on the team. And this opens up the door for max skill burst shenanigans on the turns you have ult. But oftentimes it'll definitely come down to either sacrificing Bronya's buff or just doing a single non-enhanced basic attack right before she comes up. Now for my players without Bronya, you have a couple different options here. Your hardest, and I mean by far the hardest option, is to somehow get Dan Heng at an incredible speed threshold. I mean, I'm talking like 150s. Without that, you won't really be going twice per turn as often as you would with Bronya. So a lot of things change about how you play this particular team comp. At the moment, or for this particular representation, I'll use Ting Yun. And like I said earlier, you pretty much change your game plan. You probably want to give your healer the Passerby Relic set for the extra skill point at the start of the battle. This way you can start the game by giving Daniel his harmony buff or applying a nihility debuff on the enemy. That'll cost 1 skill point. You proceed to max skill burst and pay attention to your SP management from there, but unlike the Bronya setup, you won't get reliable multi-actions per turn unless your speed is outstanding for everyone on the team, not just Dan Heng. The general gist of this team is to keep your buffer or debuffer, depending on how you're playing this, ahead of Dan Heng. You speed tune the other 2 characters to whatever you need so that Dan Heng always has 3 skill points to use when it's his turn. Now, when I played this particular team setup and I didn't get to use my Dan Heng multiple times per turn, eventually it got to a point where I just was not getting 2 actions per cycle, and I decided to drop my speed boots for attack percent boots, which significantly increased my damage. I think I'm talking like 20 to 30% worth of an increase in my damage. So if you're fine with only attacking once during your cycle, by all means, take off those speed boots, bro, and put attack boots on.
I stand here to fight for a new life.
Imagine Dragon's team composition actually does feel a bit restrictive, not in the sense of you can only use 4 characters and nothing else, and more in the sense of he will always be the main DPS, and therefore because of his skill point consumption, you aren't really fitting a sub DPS on the team comfortably. For that reason, a lot of these teams might seem samey, but if you have any questions, just ask me in the comment section. Also, guys and gals, feel free to help me out with answering any of these questions as well, because I'm not always at my desk. First up is the Golden Daniel team, aka My Dad is Rich. This team consists of Bronya, Dan Heng, Locha or Japard, and Silverwolf. Yes, it is a full-bred limited 5-star team. I guess Bronya and Japard aren't really limited 5 stars, but still 5 stars all the way around. I explained the function of this team earlier in the video, but to elaborate just a tiny bit further, you'll be using Bronya and Dan Heng's skill most of the time. Locha and Japard are there to generate skill points, but emergencies do happen. These 2 in particular were chosen over characters like Natasha or March because they don't need to support the team by constantly using skill points. Silverwolf makes for the final team member because she stacks the most debuffs in the game with the strongest values. And because of her ability to keep reapplying the debuffs through any attack, she can basically use a skill or ultimate and then just keep basic attacking to keep her debuffs on. Pela can be used over Silverwolf, but her debuff will come from the ultimate. Speaking of course without having Eidolons. If you're using her with the Wastelander set, be mindful that you won't receive the extra crit bonuses unless the enemy is imprisoned or has been hit with Pela's ultimate. The next team is much more free-to-play friendly and helps achieve the same, if not similar, 2-turn ultimate results as the Bronya team. We can call this team, I'm not the stepmom, I'm the mom that stepped up. That'll consist of Ting Yun, Imagine Dragon, Locha Ordrapard, and Pela. If you can't tell, this team is still similar to the last, but you're able to function with an SP positive team so that you have a lot more leeway with what you're doing. Ting Yun's ability to use her skill once every 3 turns to boost an ally, along with the other 2 allies on the team constantly generating skill points, makes it entirely possible for Daniel to always max skill burst. Her ultimate will still give you the damage boost, and on top of that, something that no one else in the game currently does, will be giving you 50% energy for whatever it is that you want to do with your ultimate. Locha makes it so that you really don't need to use skill points to heal. He also gives you the ability to imprison enemies thanks to his ultimate or basic attack in the event that you do that. And Pela keeps it to where you can still stack debuffs with her ultimate as well. Contrary to Ting Yun, you could replace her for a much more offensive Wukong and just hammer the pressure on the enemies. I enjoyed the buffs a lot, but they came with problems, and my main problem I had with using Wukong over Ting Yun was the lack of consistent buffs. Wukong can be treated like Bronya, where she has the option to use her skill every single turn. The main problem from there is that Daniel needs to sit right behind Wukong every time to receive the buff, and whenever she doesn't use her skill, he doesn't get the buff. She also benefits from having 2 DPS units on the team to take advantage of those same buffs. That includes her skill as well as her ultimate, which you really only get 1 shot of using the crit rate and crit damage bonuses for. That is in comparison to Ting Yun, who gives you 3 turns of benediction as well as 2 turns from her ultimate. Wukong wasn't horrible to play with Daniel, at least when the buffs were on. And I mean, they're on. Mad big boy damage all over the place. But when the buffs are off, it really felt like Wukong just didn't need to be there.
I stand here to fight for a new life.
So from everything that you guys can see here, I can turn off every single buff that would be relatively relevant to said character. And I could even turn off the Ting Yun buff. And you can see the average or standard damage that you're going to be looking at getting. My talents are 777, which I believe are pretty accurate, and I have all of the boost available from my traces. Wastelander of Banditry set was my immediate go-to for testing purposes, and as you guys can see right up top here, that's what I put in there. I used the same stats on every single piece that I could manage, which were my Wastelander set. I pretty much pulled these out of the game directly, so everything matched up when I was doing my testing in-game versus through the calculator. But at the last minute, I started looking at Welt for the Nihility option on the team. There's a second part of a Bandit's Relic set that gives you another 20% increase in crit damage whenever you are facing off against imprisoned enemies. The only way to guarantee this is using Welt's ultimate. Otherwise, you'll need to break the enemies with one of your imaginary characters. Not impossible, but it's not always active. And that led me into testing my next set. On screen, you guys can see the Musketeer set that I have tested and available. Once again, all of my stats are, or should be, relatively the exact same. Some things, of course, will be different just because I'm not able to get these things with the Musketeer or Wastelander set. Musketeer will be giving me the extra 12% in a raw attack increase, and it's going to give me a speed increase from the 4-piece set alone. Now, while testing this and while doing the Bronya thing, the speed increase from the 4-piece helps you achieve that 135 net speed a lot easier, and finally it increases the basic attack damage by 10%. Since Daniel is always using his basic attack, this just turns into another stack of free damage. Using just Wastelander and the Musketeer set, once I activate Daniel's buffs, which are going to come very natural to this character, he attacks, he gets his buffs. That's the basic way to put it. There's not a lot of conditions that go behind that. He also has a free 18% crit rate, which will influence whether or not you're going to be able to use certain pieces like the crit damage body piece or a crit rate body piece. But for the sake of comparison, I'm going to use his signature light cone all the way through this. As you guys can see here, once we trigger those buffs and we get everything started, you now see that the Wastelander set versus the Musketeer set, even with Musketeer's bonuses that it provides, is going to give you, roughly speaking, negative 10%, I should say, damage difference. And it's not the end of the world. As you can see, I have not included any of the Tingyun, Bronya, Silverwolf, nothing like this. None of this stuff is active, just so you can see a raw damage from just Daniel by himself. And at that value, it is basically a negative 10% difference, which again, not the end of the world here. Now, the last relic set that I wanted to talk about was something that I randomly thought about due to reading the description, and you will not believe what it is. The Hunter of Glacial Frost. I know, right? The 2-piece doesn't matter for this set, but the 4-piece bonus is actually incredible. Whenever the wearer uses their ultimate, their crit damage increases by 25% for 2 turns. You guys remember the Bronya setup that I showed you guys earlier? Well, that setup also gives Dan Heng a 2-turn ult guaranteed, which means you basically always have a free 25% crit damage boost on top of whatever else Bronya is giving you on the team. I know it sounds unorthodox, but to be valid, I kind of already calced it. As you guys can see here, it's a similar sub 10% damage difference going down, so it's in Wastelanders' favor still. Same type of stats that I had for the previous relic calcs, but that's compared to if the enemy is always imprisoned, which we know they are not. If the enemy is not imprisoned, then it comes down to a roughly speaking 5% damage loss, which again, you're already hitting 60 something thousand damage per tick as it is, not including Silverwolf and Bronya and everything else. Now, I'm still learning how to do the rotation calcs and show you guys like on a per turn basis. So I do a lot of my testing in game, and I only use the calculator to show me what I should be looking for number wise. When it comes to a consistency basis, I'm only including this because of the fact that with Bronya, you will more than likely have the buff active at all times. 2, you won't always have an enemy imprisoned without using skill points from Welt, so the extra crit damage from Wastelanders doesn't have the same consistency. Using Hunter is more than likely a luxury set, and it's probably something that's very gimmicky, but I do think it's worth considering simply because it's fun. When it comes to his light cones, I'll break this down into free-to-play, gacha, and a 5-star similar to my previous guides. Free-to-play's best option is on the fall of an Aeon. There's just no debating it. With the ability to superimpose this to S5 for free and obtain it for free, there's no reason anyone should be asking themselves if it's worth using this light cone or not. A raw 64% attack increase on top of a 24% damage increase when inflicting a weakness break on an enemy. These are conditional, but they're so easily and naturally conditional for Dan Heng that he's gonna do it anyway. Coming back to my calc sheet, based on multiple damage calcs as well as in-game testing, the damage difference from an S5 Fall of the Aeon to an S1 Brighter Than the Sun is about a 10% damage difference for those that want to min-max. If for whatever reason you have an S1 Fall of the Aeon and you cannot get an S5, then you're looking at roughly speaking a 20-ish% damage difference without including any of the buffs. Something else to keep in mind is that you do not get a free crit rate or energy regeneration rate from the signature light cone on Fall of an Aeon. What that means is you can no longer run a crit damage body piece. So as I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of things that change with not being able to run his signature light cone. And of course, in the ideal scenario, when you are able to properly min-max or you just get really lucky with RNG, you will be able to achieve some of these things. I have a Musketeer set, and my Musketeer set has enough to be able to use the Rutilant Arena, but I have to run the crit rate body piece, so I'm missing out on my crit damage. With that in mind, you're going to be looking at, once again, a roughly speaking 20% damage difference between the signature light cone and the Fall of an Aeon. So these calcs aren't absolute. I don't want anyone looking at this and like, oh man, there's a 20% damage difference, I'm gonna run with it. This is meant for you to understand what you're giving up. The signature light cone itself gives you a lot more windows for damage than just its initial damage boost. The extra crit rate makes it so much easier for you to run a crit damage body piece and focus less on that substat. Where with one light cone, you would need almost an extra 40% crit rate, where with the signature light cone, you need 20% or less. You don't have the free energy regeneration rate, so no 2-turn ultimates, not including if you have Bronya or not. And it also opens the door for utilizing Rutilant Arena, which further opens how many extra substats or main stat pieces you can mess around with. For the sake of argument, this is of course looking at things like break effect and attack percent ropes over the energy regeneration ropes to help keep your ultimate up. The convenience of the light cone quickly becomes less about immediate damage and more about what you value more: time or jades.
I stand here to fight for a new life.
Eidolons, Imagine Dragon, Eidolons. I don't want to talk about these. His Eidolons are busted, and it feels like every single time I talk about somebody's Eidolons, they get more and more and more and more busted. Each and every character release Hoyoverse, why do you keep doing this? You can't have all my money. I have to pay bills. I have to pay rent. You can't keep doing this. Oh no, EO, there's no way they're that busted. Okay, let me show you how busted they are. E1 increases his righteous heart stacks by 4, turning them into 10, and it doubles the amount he gains every single attack, which means you only have to attack half the time to get max stacks of 10. You know how much extra damage that is? Just raw damage. Extra, boom, here you go, bro. 10%. That's almost 100% extra damage raw. Bro, that's a lot of damage. E2 turns this man into his own version of Bronya. He literally replaces the character on the team. After using his ultimate, he advances forward by 100%. And he gets an extra Squama token. Do you know how broken that is? E4 makes those buffs from dominating Roar last until Dan Heng's next turn, which basically means they are always on. He never loses the buff. He is broken. Lastly, and I think this might be the most disgusting thing that I've seen in combination with every other Eidolon. E6, DNA digivolves Daniel and Silverwolf, and then turns them into a male version of Zila. Any ally that uses their ultimate, and then Imbibitor Lunae just gains imaginary resistance penetration on his next max skill burst. The damage then increases by 20% and it stacks up to 3 times. If I catch any of you sniping Daniel Eidolons, I'm coming to your house and I'm using your bank account to fund my pool. Friendos, that's a wrap. Thank you guys for watching my Imagine Dragon guide, and I hope you took some valuable information from it. Moral of this story is that Imagine Dragon is a monster, no matter what you do with him. Brighter than the sun, Fall of an Aeon, Musketeer, or Wanderer. Regardless of what you're running, you're about to easily hit 100,000 damage after popping your skill. As always, if you enjoyed the video, do leave a like and subscribe. Join my Discord because we're growing every day, and follow me on Twitch because I want the purple check mark. Comment down below what you plan on doing with your Daniel, and smell you later.